Lots of times we have an initial contract that we signed, and if you signed an as-is residential contract for sale and purchase, it means you are taking the property as is. And this is an example of an as-is residential contract. As-is residential contract, you are taking the real property with the personal property that's included here, taking that as is, meaning if there's any defects, the responsibility to conduct your due diligence to find out whether or not there are any issues with the property that you deem unacceptable. Okay, so when we go to the provisions in the contract that pertain to the disclosures, of course, we have the standard disclosures, rate on gas, permits, mold, flood elevation, and so forth. And these are the other due diligence things that you need to handle. Looking at your due diligence in a residential contract is, first of all, radon gas is naturally occurring. You can test for it and see how much radon there may be in the building. Okay. Checking to see whether or not there have been permits that have not been pulled or made to the premises, or permits that have not been closed out. Some cases where even contractors fail to close out the permits. Mold. Mold is a naturally occurring substance, but it does have to be tested separately. So be careful of that and make sure you do get that that you deem or that your home inspector has deemed that there are mold or potential for mold. You need to have that inspected. And then flood zone certifications. Of course, we have to make sure that the elevations are correct. Flood zones affect whether or not you have to be insured for flood issues that arises, or things that arise from floods. And that could be, I've seen, I actually have a property where one corner of the house is deemed to be in a flood zone. Okay, there's ways to actually have that waived, but for all intents and purposes, it does take additional steps. Lead-based paint, anything pre-1978, you will have the potential for lead-based paint. There must be a disclosure that is provided to you. Also need to be able to check for lead-based paint in your due diligence period, meaning your inspection period. Okay, there are other homeowners associations and so forth that need to be taken care of. And look at an as-is contract. You have, under the inspection period, a property inspection and right to cancel period, meaning the property inspection, your inspection period, certain number of days to conduct the inspections to see whether or not the property is desirable to you. So if you, in basically with an as-is contract, if buyer determines, as it states here, in buyer's sole discretion that the property is not acceptable to the buyer can terminate the contract by delivering written notice of its election not to go forward. That written notice must be provided to the seller prior to the expiration of the inspection period. If you have 15 days, as it states in here, from the effective date to conduct an inspection, that is your inspection period, you must do the inspection and then in your sole discretion determine whether or not you're going forward. If you are not going forward, you must give written notice to the seller prior to the inspection period. Okay. If you as a buyer terminate the contract timely, give written notice prior to the end of the inspection period, then your deposit will likely be returned without question, okay? Because you have the right to do so pursuant to the contract. Both buyer and seller will be released from further obligations, but buyer is responsible for payment for the inspections to repair the damage that is caused by anything that the inspector did, and so forth, okay? If the inspector does cause damage to the property, meaning let's say you have mold inspection and they put a hole in the wall, is going to require you to fix the damage, and then provide paid receipts for all work done. They know that there's no contractor that is outstanding that needs to be paid. Okay, we don't want to create any title issues, any lien issues, and so forth. Okay, individuals that actually go in there and they kind of rip out the walls if the property's been sitting there for years. Hidden issues determine the extent of the mold. So, in mind, you as the buyer are responsible for that, but you do have the right to cancel the contract. You do not cancel the contract as a buyer by the end of the inspection period. You are accepting the physical condition of the property and any violation of governmental, building, environmental, safety codes, restrictions, or other requirements. You're taking the property as is with all of its issues. Okay, so you only have that period of time to do the inspections and determine whether or not you're going forward. And if you are not, you must notify them in writing. Otherwise, you are deemed to accept the property in its current state. Okay. Seller only has the obligation to continue maintenance, meaning they don't have to fix it. They just have to continue on to the end of until the closing occurs. Okay. Now, if buyer is getting funding, will be responsible for any and all repairs and improvements required by buyer's lender. Okay, so depending upon the lender, depending upon the type of loan and so forth, is responsible. Okay, be a walkthrough inspection or reinspection. As taken the property as is, you still have the right to walk through the day of closing. Okay, or that the maintenance requirement for the seller has been kept, meaning that there's no fire or flood that's destroyed the property even further, and that the personal property or items of personal property that were mentioned in the beginning of the contract that are included do stay. Okay. Seller, of course, will have to cooperate with and so forth. If they have any plans or documentation in their control. Okay. The as-is contract obligates the seller to cooperate, obligates the seller to keep the property in its current condition, and cooperate with the property. Okay, seller is not required to expend any money. There is no money that the seller will put up in an as-is contract. Okay, now everything in a real estate contract is negotiable. So, choose and the buyer wants to cancel, they can elect to cancel. They can also pose to the seller that the seller do certain things to allow the buyer to go through the contract, meaning the buyer can bring up that they need certain things corrected. If the seller does that, then they will continue on and take the property as is. Okay, so everything is negotiable, but pursuant to the as-is contract, seller has no legal responsibility to expend any money to repair the property, to make it livable. They don't have to do anything to the property, sell it to the buyer. So, if you have any questions, we could certainly. I have other videos that the terms and so forth that are included in an as-is contract, but this for home inspection or inspection and due diligence purposes, and over the properties of the contract and how it works. If you have any questions or concerns, let us know. Thanks.